The population. When I was born, there were
so what's wrong with the population? I mean,
we're too many people. That's why we have global warming. We have global warming because too many people are using too much stuff. But if there were less people, they'd be using less stuff. You know, we don't get global warming and the nuclear weapons straight out. We don't have to worry about human rights.
What if the Christian purity culture is a weapon for depopulation? Have you heard of the Georgia Guidestones, which say, keep the world's population down to 500 million. Imagine if governments secretly weaponize Christianity as an psyops against relationships and sex between men and women in order to manipulate demographics.
And speaking of families, Le Croix has an article today about climate change and the role of families, the role that they play in that.
Exactly. Should we limit the world's population to save the planet? That's the headline this morning in La Croix. They are talking about how Emmanuel Macron is going to the climate summit today, and he'll be joined by other heads of state as well as thousands of activists. Now, the paper goes into how earlier this week, 15,000 scientists signed a petition calling for measures to help limit the world's population by promoting family planning and educating people, especially young girls. Now, La Croix says, now it's important to note that La Croix is actually a Christian paper. So the paper says it's a very sensitive subject, and they call for, quote, responsible procreation. But La Croix says that certain measures, such as abortion and certain forms of birth control, are not acceptable.
But they also talk to another activist who has a very different view on that.
Could Christian purity culture have had a negative impact on childbearing in America? Ask ChatGTP. Short answer, yes. Christian purity culture may have affected childbearing in the US, but the effect is indirect and quite complex. Research shows both possible negative and positive effects, and the outcome depends on which parts of the phenomenon you look at. Here is a balanced review. Possible negative effects on childbearing purity culture: strong focus on abstinence before marriage. Guilt linked to sexuality, gender roles, etc., can affect childbearing in several ways that ultimately reduce the number of children some people have. 1. Later marriage and reduced sexual confidence. Many who grew up in a purity culture testify in studies that they experience difficulties with sexuality in adulthood, even within marriage. This, in turn, can lead to lower sexual activity and/or delayed pregnancies. Others marry later because they experience pent-up fear or shame around sexuality, and later marriages are statistically correlated with fewer children. 2. Shame and fear around sex can create problems in relationships. Research in psychology shows that sexuality-related shame can lead to difficulties with intimacy, higher divorce rates in certain groups, lower likelihood of large families. 3. Lack of comprehensive sex education in areas where a purity culture dominates. Sex education based solely on abstinence is common. This has been shown to lead to more unplanned pregnancies among teenagers, but not necessarily more births. As abortions and economic factors play a role, less knowledge about fertility, which can lead to involuntary childlessness later in life. Ironically, this can mean both more early pregnancies and fewer planned children in adulthood.
That kid should stick around for that, even though it might be really bad for her and the child.
It's my opinion that biblical prophecies are shaping up to be fulfilled right now, and I made the decision to be abstinent, to stop having sex with my girlfriend at the time, because I knew it was a sin against my own body, against her body, and against the Lord. And I also knew that I wanted to secure God's favor over my life. I wanted to honor God with my life, and I wanted God to reward me in turn for that. And quite honestly, he has, man, in spades. So I would just encourage you, seek to honor the Lord with your life. Pray to him for where it is
about it. One to go, and I appreciate your honesty, Jacob. Jesus said if you look at a woman and lust for her, you commit adultery with her in your heart. Have you ever looked at a woman with lust?
Why, yes, I look at many women with lust in my heart.
Of course. Have you ever looked at a guy with lust?
With lust?
Lust.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Not recently.
I have indeed.
Are you having sex outside of marriage?
No, not yet.
Are you looking at pornography?
Yes.
Are you lusting after women?
Of course.
Have you ever looked at a woman with lust?
Absolutely.
So, Peter, by your own admission, you're a lying thief, a blasphemer, and an adulterer at heart. And that's only 4 of the 10 commandments. What I'm saying to you is just not believing in hell doesn't make it go away. A judge must see that justice is done if he's a good judge, and it's the same with God. If we die in our sins, God will give us justice. The Bible says no thief, no liar, no fornicator, no blasphemer, no adulterer will inherit the kingdom of God. So, Julia, if you died in your sins and God gave you justice because he's holy and perfect morally, you'd end up in hell, and I'd hate that to happen to you.
But isn't it true that stopping the rise in population would be one of the biggest levers in driving the rise in greenhouse gases? Is that
well, I mean, we all know we expect 9 billion, right, by 2050. So yes, obviously, less people would exert less pressure on the natural resources, and that's
so. Is
just
9
math.
billion a foregone conclusion? That's like baked in, done. No way to change that.
Well, there again, there's pressure in the system to go toward that. We can definitely change those, right? We can definitely change those numbers, and we really should make every effort to change the numbers because we are already exceeding the planetary carrying capacity today, to say nothing of adding more population that is going to really overextend our capacity. So yes, we should do everything possible, but we cannot fall into the very simplistic opinion of saying just by curtailing population, then we've solved the problem. It is not an either or, it is an and also.
Christianity cannot completely ban sex. It would go against the context of the Bible. So Christian purity culture has weaponized the marriage contract against heterosexuality by compartmentalizing heterosexuality into the marriage contract. The Christian purity culture has succeeded in prohibiting all heterosexuality that is not already compartmentalized into a marriage contract. So the marriage contract became the perfect trap for sexual celibacy. The Christian purity culture uses the marriage contract as a bait and switch. In this way, Christian purity culture has made it illegal for unmarried people to be heterosexual. Yes, by compartmentalizing heterosexuality into marriage. The Christian purity culture has succeeded in making heterosexuality 95% evil. Purity culture has made it illegal to seek a partner. If you want to get married, you are heterosexual. And unmarried people are not allowed to be heterosexual. And purity culture requires men and women to avoid each other both physically and mentally. The Christian purity culture forces men and women to adapt a homosocial lifestyle that makes heterosexual relationships and marriage almost impossible.
Listen to this quote from Ayn Rand. This is a monologue from one of the villains in Atlas Shrugged. "There is no way to disarm any man except through guilt, through that which he himself has accepted as guilt. If a man has ever stolen a dime, you can impose on him the punishment intended for a bank robber, and he will take it. He'll bear any form of misery. He'll feel that he deserves no better. If there's not enough guilt in the world, we must create it. If we teach a man that it is evil to look at spring flowers, and he believes us and then does it, we'll be able to do whatever we please with him. He won't feel he's worth it. He won't fight." Such is the
The Christian purity culture constantly attacks men and women's puberty. Purity culture proclaims that puberty is a sin. Purity culture forces heterosexual men and women to fight against their own nature. Purity culture forces men and women to adopt something called abstinence. Abstinence is a lifestyle that aims to lower men and women's libido. Abstinence means that you must avoid all forms of erotic stimulation. In the long term, this has both mental and physical consequences. When you starve the brain's sexual center on impulse, the brain cells die. This reduces the production of sex hormones because the brain sends signals to the genitals that produce sex hormones. Abstinence also requires that men and women practice so-called nofap, which means that you must avoid masturbation. In the long run, this leads to the genitals becoming flaccid, which has medical consequences such as impotence. Over time, this leads to decreased reproductive capacity. Humans are made for sex, not the other way around. Avoiding sex altogether leads to premature aging of reproductive capacity.
What happens to your penis if you don't have sex? If you don't have sex for a long time, if you have sex infrequently, what can happen to your penis? Guys, I'm Dr. Jen Caudle, practicing family physician, on-air health expert, and video creator. That is the topic of today. I'm going to give you 4 main things that I want to talk about today, that changes that you can see in your penis if you don't have sex. Let's just jump right in. Let's start with the first one, okay? The first one is that infrequent sex can actually cause the tissue on your penis, around your penis, to become less elastic. Okay, and it can also shrink. Now, this can actually lead to your penis being 1 to 2 centimeters shorter. So that is something that can actually happen with infrequent sex, not having sex. Your penis can kind of shrink due to decreased elasticity of the tissue around on the penis, and also sort of shrinkage. So keep this in mind. Now, I also want to mention I've done some videos on what the average penis size is. By the way, you probably will be surprised. I'll make sure I link that video in the comments, in the description of this video, and I'll also sort of link it as well, and the cards, etc. You can DM me if you don't see it. But we're also going to talk about a few other things I think is important. I should also say, the reason why I'm doing this video is, by the way, as a family doctor, I talk about all sorts of health, everything, right? Blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, etc., men's health, women's health. I did a video on what can happen or what happens to your vagina if you don't have sex. And a lot of people watch that video asking, well, what happens to the penis if you don't have sex? So that is where this video is coming from, and I think it was an excellent question, okay? So the first thing is that, yes, your penis can kind of shrink. It can become less elastic. It can kind of have some shrinkage, okay? If sex is infrequent, if you don't have sex. All right, moving on to the next thing. And I think this is really important. This is not just a vanity thing, and I want to be very clear. When I talk about sexual health, and this is something we should all feel, this is about our overall health. Sexual health is part of overall health. So in talking about what happens to your penis, we're essentially also indirectly or directly talking about what happens to your health. That's one of the biggest reasons why this is so important. Okay, number 2. What else happens if you don't have sex? What happens to your penis? Well, infrequent sex may actually lead to erectile dysfunction. That's right. Infrequent sex, not having sex, can in a person who has a penis could actually lead to a higher risk of erectile dysfunction later on in life. Now, there's a number of reasons why this potentially may be the case. And I also want to say, this is not one size fits all, okay? But this is according to some of the best evidence we have at this time. These are some general principles that we do think apply to many people who have penises, okay? But yes, it is often thought that infrequent sex in some people may lead to a higher risk of erectile dysfunction later on in life, okay? Moving on, number 3. So, and before I tell you what number 3 is, let me explain just very briefly when we talk about erections, okay? Erections are very important because what happens when someone gets an erection is that there is blood flow that goes into the penis. That is one of the main things that causes it to be erect. It is blood flow. Now, remember, blood flow is really important to our whole body for so many different reasons. Blood carries oxygen, all sorts of, it does a lot of things. So blood flow in general, for most parts of our body and most things, is actually a good thing. It is for a penis as well, because an erection means there is blood flow. So sex, or an erection rather, means there's an increased blood flow to the penis, which tends to lead to stronger and longer erections, and sort of really contributes to a healthy penis, penis health in general. Meaning, when you have erections, you're really contributing to your overall penis health. Let me put it that way. Hopefully that makes sense. You're contributing to your overall penis health because erections means that there is blood flow going into the penis, and that is good for your overall penis health. Stronger, longer erections, etc., potentially. If you're not having erections, if you're not having erections frequently, etc., you may be at a disadvantage. You may not have that advantage that some other people may have if they are having, more frequent erections, okay? So keep that in mind, that erection is about blood flow, and blood flow to the penis, that's a good thing, okay? Moving on, and by the way, I should also say too, I have some videos on when it comes to sexual health. It's not just about what happens to the penis if you don't have sex or don't have sex for a long time. I do have videos also on what happens to your penis as you age, because there are changes that naturally occur, just like with a vagina, there are changes that occur. But there are also things that we should understand about erectile dysfunction. I have videos on erectile dysfunction, low testosterone, the causes of ED or erectile dysfunction. Just make sure you check those out, because there are other videos that may answer some other questions that may come up for you during this video. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about, the fourth and final thing, is regarding ejaculation, okay? So I think this is so interesting, but there have been some studies that actually show that men who ejaculate more may actually have a lower risk of prostate cancer. That sounds like good news to me, and I have a feeling it probably sounds like good news to a lot of people. And I think it's also hopefully reassuring to you as you're watching this video that, this idea of erections, it's actually a physiological function that is healthy for our body. Ejaculation, actually, we think of as sort of a healthy process, okay, for our body. So this sort of plays into that and plays a role in that some of these studies, again, have shown that, men who ejaculate more may have a lower risk of prostate cancer, okay? Now, there are some studies that sort of refute this. This is up for a little bit of debate depending on, which experts you talk to. Some may have a different spin, but a higher rate of ejaculations has been associated with a lower risk of prostate cancer. And, if you're not ejaculating, you may not have this potential benefit, okay? And that's something really important to keep in mind. The point here is that not only should we be taking care of our minds and our heart and our kidneys and our liver and our pancreas and our, our extremities and all sorts of stuff, our skin, but our sexual organs are not just for sex. They also have a place and a role in our overall health. When it comes to the penis, erections are healthy. It means blood flow. Ejaculation can be very healthy, and so much more. And by the way, these four things that I mentioned are just for things that can happen if you don't have sex, things that can happen to the penis if you don't have sex, potentially, right? There are so many other things. You think about the psychological aspect. Remember that sexuality, sexual intercourse, being sexually involved with someone, there's intimacy in that. There is a lot that goes on and in with that gives us benefit, okay, that I'm not mentioning, that you may not get if you're not intimate with someone or sexually involved, okay? So keep that in mind. This is just a beginning. But just remember, okay, that, sexual health is very, very important. As always, I am an advocate of safe sex, appropriate sex, consensual sex, and all of the above. What I would say is if you have any questions about any of this, ask your doctor. Use this video as a starting point to say, hey, doc, I want to talk to you about X, Y, or Z, ABC. Also, take a look at some other my other videos about what happens to your penis as you age, injuries that can happen during sex, low testosterone, erectile dysfunction, and things like that. But a healthy sex life can be very, very important for our overall health. I hope this was helpful. Please let me know. Please write in the comments. Let me know your thoughts. Share this video with anyone you think could benefit from it. I'm Dr. Jen Caudle, practicing family physician, on-air health expert, and video creator. I do daily videos and all sorts of stuff. Please like and follow my page on Facebook, on YouTube. Please subscribe to my channel. Click the little bell for updates. Also, check out my website, drjencaudle.com. I have a free health newsletter that goes out. Subscribe. Would love to